It's the most wonderful time of the year again, Christmas time! And what better way to get into the spirit of the holiday season than with a Godzilla movie? I'm sure the two things are related somehow. This is an interesting one, because I'm a Godzilla fan, but there are a bunch of films in the franchise that I haven't seen, and plus I just haven't been crazy about the direction it's been going in for the last few years. I love the original Godzilla film. I really liked Godzilla 1985, though I haven't seen it since I was a kid, so it might not be as cool as I remember. I saw a bunch more over the years. Some were better than others. The Roland Emmerich one we don't talk about, but there hasn't been a ton of really good quality Godzilla content in recent times. I quite like the 2014 film with Bryan Cranston, but the sequels have just given into excess and gotten increasingly messy and silly. The Netflix movies are just too dark and bleak for me. Even Shin Godzilla I wasn't really in love with for various reasons. Every single human character just felt like background noise in that film. So, bottom line, I've always liked Godzilla, but it's been a minute since we've had a movie I could get really excited about. And in the meantime, we've had a few that have kind of done the opposite. But then the Godzilla -1 hype machine revs up, with people calling it the best Godzilla movie of all time. I'm like, yeah, sure it is. Whatever, man. They say that about every franchise movie that comes out these days. It's all just smoke and mirrors for the marketing campaign. Get out of here with that shit. So was I cynical about -1? Maybe. Hollywood's beaten that cynicism into me, so it's kind of hard not to be sometimes. I was hoping it would be good, but I wasn't expecting anything better than average. This movie is awesome. This movie surprised the hell out of me. I haven't seen every single Godzilla film, so is this the best one ever? I honestly don't know. But here's what I do know. -1 is the first Godzilla movie I've seen where the audience in my theater applauded when it was over. The first Godzilla movie I've seen that made me cry. Literally tear up because I cared so much about what was happening. The first Godzilla movie I've seen where you could take Godzilla out of the story, remove him altogether, and it would still be a great film. There's a lot to like in this movie, but I want to start with the scale of it, because one thing that really impressed me about it was its restraint. There's an old saying you may have heard, nothing ruins a film like money. And by that I mean, when a movie has too much money to throw around, there's a temptation to get careless, to let things get dumb and lazy, to make it all about spectacle, to the point where things like character and story and smart writing start to take a back seat. You see this a lot in the new American movies, especially in King of the Monsters and Godzilla vs. Kong, where they get so obsessed with cramming in as much carnage and wide-scale destruction and massive CG fests as they can. Meanwhile, the plots are kind of going off the rails, getting messy and convoluted. They're adding tons of side characters that you don't care about or don't really do anything or are only there for comic relief and blah blah blah. And so many other Hollywood blockbusters do this, because when you've got hundreds of millions of dollars in the budget, it's easy to fall into those traps. Too many people think they can just throw money at these problems until they go away. Fix it in post, fix it with CG, edit around the giant plot holes, do tons of reshoots. But when you don't have so much money, you better make damn sure the fundamentals of your movie are rock solid, because without all those bells and whistles, that's what you're gonna have to fall back on. Does the story make sense? Are the characters likable? Do you want to see them succeed and beat the monster? So -1 might not be as big in scope as other Godzilla films. The action is not excessive. It's there when it needs to be, but it is reined in. The carnage itself is not the focus. But why this works, and what it has over a lot of those other movies, is that it really makes you care about the characters who are caught up in that carnage. It's not really about the action, it's about the people who are stuck in the middle of the action. It's about the main character trying to fire his guns at Godzilla, but he can't because his PTSD is hitting him so hard his hands won't stop shaking. It's about a guy trying to reconcile his failures during the war so he can do what needs to be done to protect his family from certain destruction. In that sense, it reminded me of the 2014 movie with Bryan Cranston, because Bryan Cranston was the best thing in that movie, but no one else was anywhere near as compelling. So once the movie was done with him, it lost something, and then people started complaining about the lack of focus on Godzilla and the Ford character being boring and whatever. -1 is like that movie if Bryan Cranston's character had been the protagonist for the entire thing. There might not not be as much Godzilla as you want, but you don't really mind because the story about this character is sucking you in so much. So when I say that this would be a great movie even without Godzilla, I mean that. At the core of it, the movie is about this guy who comes home after World War II, Japan is in shambles, everyone he cared about is dead, he's suffering from survivor's guilt and all sorts of trauma, and it follows him as he struggles to put his life back together and stumbles into an unlikely newfound family. The movie spends a good amount of time on this, and the story and the writing and acting are all so compelling that I almost didn't notice that it had actually been a while since Godzilla showed up. Hell, at one point, I was even hoping that he wouldn't show up because I was really invested in the two main characters. I wanted to see what would happen with Shikishima and Noriko before we got back to destroying cities and stuff. And when Godzilla does show up, the movie takes a less is more approach. Not like the 2014 film did exactly, but like sometimes the whole sequence will just be Godzilla and a couple of boats out on the ocean. When he invades a city, we don't see a ton of wide-scale devastation. A few buildings get smashed, one blast of atomic fire makes a big boom, so they're being very judicious with the action. But man, when they take the gloves off, it is glorious. And it works so well because they expertly build up that tension and you care so much about the characters being caught up in it. It didn't bother me at all that they took a minimalist approach to the action because I saw Godzilla do his thing, they covered that base, and then I saw this character I like be put in danger and this other character's reaction to what happens to them, and that was all the important stuff. Emotionally, there are some really gut-wrenching moments in this film. Oh, and by the way, when I say minimalist action, don't take that to mean the movie looks cheap. Holy shit, it does not. Supposedly, it had a budget of just $15 million. I have no idea how they stretched that money so far. How they did what they did for $15 million, I guess it goes a lot further in Japan. Yeah, it doesn't look as big and fancy as your typical American blockbuster, but it looks a hell of a lot more expensive than 15 million bucks, I'll tell you that. When they actually do let Godzilla cut loose, it looks great! The atomic fire, smashing through buildings, throwing trains around, all that stuff looks great! They have to pick their moments carefully when that stuff happens, but when it does happen, it really means something. And in between those moments, we're with the characters. And they're careful to never let the plot get away from them. It doesn't get too big or too complicated. It's just a small, ragtag group of people trying to protect their home from a monster, and the main character's battling his own personal demons just as much as he is Godzilla. That's what makes it so interesting. And just when you think things might be looking up for him, the movie steps on his neck and destroys him emotionally all over again. But what the movie is so good at is not giving in to that sense of darkness. That's where the Netflix movies lost me. Those things were just oppressively bleak. But here, even in the worst moments when the characters are at their lowest point and everything seems lost, there's always a little bit of light at the end of the tunnel. Like, they come up with a plan, it's a pretty desperate plan, you think there's no way they're gonna make it out of this, but then one of them makes a speech about hope for the future and not sacrificing anyone even if it seems like that's the only chance they've got, and goddammit, you're really rooting for these guys. By the time the climax came around, I was so emotionally invested, I was pretty much tearing up through the whole thing. And not because it was sad, they were just pushing all the right buttons. It's like I'm crying because this is just that f***ing good. Hey, hi. Me from the editing dungeon here. I didn't realize until afterward that this part kinda sounded like a sex metaphor. Totally unintentional, although in this case I actually think it applies pretty well. And now, back to the video. And the main character, Shikishima, had been through so much, and you want to see him come out of it and be okay, but with what he has to do, it's all up in the air, and maybe he doesn't even want to come out of it because it's been too much for him to take. It's a lot, and no spoilers, but it's a very satisfying and cathartic ending. I love this movie. This isn't just a great Godzilla film, it's one of the best films of the year. And what's more, I think Godzilla Minus One came around at the perfect time because Hollywood has been punching us in the gonads with these huge movies like Wish or The Marvels that do pretty much everything wrong, that have massive budgets they put to such terrible use that the movies end up being so bad you're wondering where the hell did all the money go, so they crash into and burn at the box office, and the whole thing is a giant embarrassment. But then, here comes Godzilla, made for a fraction of the cost, and because they couldn't splurge on a lot of that fancy schmancy stuff, they just crafted a compelling story with great characters you can root for, a monster that only appears when he needs to, and the result is one of the best damn Godzilla movies I've ever seen. The hype was real. This might very well be the best one. Godzilla just swirlied Disney and Marvel in the bathroom and stole their lunch money. This was fucking great. I'm so happy with what this movie accomplished, not just with how much they pulled off with such a modest budget, but that they were able to make such a good movie even when Godzilla wasn't there. Because Godzilla isn't in this movie as much as you might think, but that never once feels like a problem because you care so much about everyone and everything else that's happening, and when he does show up, they really make those moments count. And that was such a breath of fresh air after some other things I've had to review lately where I didn't care about anything and nothing felt like it mattered at all. I think big studios like Disney and Marvel could learn a lot from this movie. Not only does it get right what a lot of other recent Godzilla projects have gotten wrong, but Godzilla Minus One is a film that knows exactly what it's doing. No crazy bloated budget, no CG overload, no stupid agenda, cringy politics, feminism, or messaging, just a good story with adventure, thrills, drama, and characters you love. It seems like a pathetically simple formula, but a lot of these Hollywood clowns don't seem to understand that anymore. So once in a while, it's really nice to be reminded that there are some people out there making movies who still do. I'm still not sure what the -1 thing means, though. Thanks so much for watching. While you're here, ding that bell icon and follow my social media so you can always be notified when I upload new stuff. The links are down there. And listen up for just a second, okay? The goal for this year was 50,000 subscribers. At the moment, there's a little less than a month left on the calendar, and I'm less than 300 away from 51,000. I don't think it's unreasonable if I move the goalpost just a tiny bit here. So I'd really appreciate it if you guys could do all the other YouTube things by hitting that thumbs up, leaving a comment, subscribing if you haven't already, and making sure you're still subscribed, because what really deserves to be incinerated by Godzilla's atomic fire is the YouTube algorithm. Didn't know I could still do that, did you? See you next time.